You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision.
Right, like it's a math problem.
Exactly, like engineering or something. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at it and says, there it is.
Yeah.
It's binary. Broken or not broken, it's clean.
And it's comforting, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, we like things to be visible. We like the world to be easily categorized into, problems we can see and solutions we can just apply.
But then you step into the world of neurodevelopment and psychological trauma, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just utterly useless.
Oh, completely.
We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, well, honestly, it's murky. You can't just point to a shadow on a film and say, there's the childhood trauma.
No, definitely not.
Or like, look, the PTSD is acting up right there in the lower left quadrant. It doesn't work like that.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. I mean, the architecture of a traumatized mind, it doesn't show up on a scan, but it absolutely dictates how a person navigates the physical world.
Yeah.
And that perfectly encapsulates the psychological terrain we were exploring today.
Exactly. Because today, for all of you joining us, welcome to this deep dive. We are plunging headfirst into the pulse-pounding, highly claustrophobic world of The Survivor.
Such a good book.
It really is. It's a 2026 thriller by Andrew Reid. And right off the bat, we need to talk about what Reid brings to the table here. Because he isn't just writing a standard run-of-the-mill thriller.
No, he's pulling from real experience.
Right. He has a real-world background as a research scientist in forensics and DNA. He understands the literal microscopic mechanisms of human tissue.
The blood spatter, the biological breakdown, all of it.
Yes. And he uses that background to inject this gritty, visceral realism into the narrative. It makes every cut, every bruise, and every panicked heartbeat you read about feel incredibly, uncomfortably real.
It's that scientific grounding that elevates the tension. It takes it from a simple page turner to something that actually affects your own heart rate as you read it.
Oh, for sure. My Apple Watch actually thought I was working out during chapter 4.
I believe it. Because Reid understands the mechanical biology of the human body breaking down under duress, but more importantly, he understands the mechanics of the human mind breaking down under extreme stress.
Yeah.
The trauma in this story isn't just a convenient backstory, it's a physical presence in the room. It basically dictates the physics of survival for these characters.
So the mission for this deep dive, for all of you listening, is to unpack these intricate layers of trauma, survival logic, and crisis response.
Because there's so much to dig into.
There really is. And it's all hidden within what is, on its surface, a high-stakes, locked-room thriller taking place on a moving New York City subway. We're going to see how the past literally hunts the present.
That's terrifying.
It is. So let's meet our protagonist, Ben Cross. Now, I want you to imagine yourself in Ben's shoes for a second. It is his very first day at a new corporate job in New York City.
A huge deal.
A massive deal. He's moved across the country, signed an incredibly expensive lease, gone through all the agonizing corporate orientation, and on his first actual morning, sitting at his new desk.
He gets fired.
Unceremoniously fired, just walked out the back door by security.
It's a completely destabilizing event for anyone. But for Ben, it's catastrophic.
Why is it so much worse for him?
Because for Ben, this job wasn't just a paycheck, it was an escape hatch from his past. He is trying to construct a brand new identity, and he is stripped of that identity before he even gets to wear it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we've all had bad days, we've all faced professional rejection or, the sudden severing of a social contract. It's highly relatable.
Sure, you pack up your sad little cardboard box and you go home.
Right. But Reid immediately twists this mundane, bureaucratic failure into a visceral struggle for survival. Because right after he's fired, Ben is standing at the top of the subway stairs at the South Ferry station in Lower Manhattan.
And it's a miserable day physically.
Oh, it's 100 degrees outside. The humidity is oppressive. He can't afford a cab. The bus is its own special kind of gridlocked hell, and he just needs to get home. But he is absolutely paralyzed by a creeping, inexplicable terror of the dark descent into the subway.
He literally cannot bring himself to walk down those concrete stairs into the dark.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is how Reid externalizes Ben's internal psychological state.
Exactly. The physical descent into the subway tunnel perfectly mirrors his psychological plunge back into a nightmare he thought he had successfully escaped.
He's just standing on the precipice.
Right, and the darkness of the stairs isn't just a lack of municipal lighting. To his traumatized brain, it represents the void of his past, waiting to swallow him whole again.
He's clinging to the handrail, right?
Yeah, with 3 points of contact. His knuckles are white. He looks like a mountain climber on the edge of a vertical cliff, just holding on to keep from falling into his own history.
And while he's frozen there, experiencing this monumental internal crisis, the rest of New York is just brushing past him. Personal trainers, tourists, guys in finance suits, they're vanishing into the blackness of the subway entrance like it's the most normal thing in the world.
Because for them, it is.
Right. And then he has this encounter. A stranger bumps him, but then another man actually stops. A guy with a thick southern drawl wearing a tan jacket and these chunky orthopedic faux leather shoes.
He puts a heavy fatherly hand on Ben's shoulder to ground him.
Which is such a specific detail.
It is, and it's a brilliant deployment of a grounding technique. When someone is trapped in an acute panic attack, their amygdala, that's the fear center of the brain, has completely hijacked their prefrontal cortex.
So logic is just gone.
Logic is entirely gone. The physical touch, the sudden sensory input of a heavy hand on the shoulder, it forces the brain to process current external stimuli rather than the internal panic.
That makes a lot of sense.
The man recognizes the physical symptoms of a struggle, even if he doesn't know the specifics. He tells Ben, "We all need help, son."
And he gives Ben something. He places a single poker chip in Ben's hand. It's a 15-year AA chip.
The words Unity Recovery Service form a triangle on the metal.
The irony here is just dripping off the page. This small, profound act of grace, this symbol of overcoming a 15-year struggle with personal demons, is the exact thing that gives Ben the push to walk down into the subway.
He thinks it's a sign.
Yeah. He thinks it's fate. He thinks, I'm meant to take the train. I can conquer this. But he is actually walking straight into a meticulously designed horror show.
The irony is devastating. And the number 15 is also incredibly significant, as we'll come to realize later. But you're right, this act of grace is the catalyst for his descent.
Once he commits, the second step is the hardest. He practically falls down the rest of the stairs to avoid giving his panic a chance to catch up with him.
And then he's in. He crosses the turnstile, and the physical trap begins to close around him.
I really want to dig into the setting here because the New York City subway is basically an antagonist in its own right in this book. Reid describes the psychological rules of the subway so perfectly.
Oh, the civil inattention.
Yes. If you've ever ridden public transit in a major city, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a massive shared neurosis. Sociologists call it civil inattention.
It's fascinating. You have millions of people voluntarily descending 100 feet underground,
Climbing into a metal tube.
and hurtling through the dark under 100 million tons of concrete and river water. How do humans neurologically cope with that level of confinement?
By following the unwritten rules.
Exactly. You don't look at anyone, you don't talk to anyone, you don't touch anyone. You actively pretend you are entirely alone.
It's a collective agreement to ignore reality in order to survive the commute. And Reid highlights the sensory details that constantly threaten to betray that illusion.
The harsh, strip light brightness designed to trick your brain into thinking it's daytime.
Right. The colorful posters for Broadway shows acting as visual pacifiers, but they can't control the atmosphere. The oppressive heat of the stations, the smell of ozone and steel dust.
The physical push and pull of the displaced air from the trains arriving. The subway suppresses claustrophobia by overwhelming you with the sheer, indifferent weight of the system.
But it also isolates you completely. You are surrounded by hundreds of bodies, yet you have never been more isolated.
Which makes it the perfect hunting ground.
Okay, so Ben gets on the train, finds an empty seat, and just slumps there with his briefcase, wallowing in the fact that he has nowhere to be.
He checks his phone, figuring maybe he should block the numbers of the other new hires so he doesn't have to explain why he got fired.
But before he can, he gets a text from an unknown number. The preview just says, "Tough day for all of us, huh?"
Now, put yourself in Ben's mindset. His immediate assumption is that he's being mocked by someone from the company.
A cruel prank.
Right, by another new hire who also got fired, or maybe someone from corporate security who escorted him out. He texts back, asking who it is, and then the digital trap snaps completely shut.
The replies come in, and it is absolutely not a prank. The unknown sender drops a photo into the chat. It's a picture of an older man in a suit, lying down on what looks like a subway platform, and his throat is slashed.
That's brutal.
Slashed so deeply that Ben can see the white of the cartilage and bone. It's an execution. The blood is pooled underneath him in a massive dark halo.
The intrusion of this graphic, hyper-violent reality into the mundane, safe space of Ben's smartphone screen is violently jarring. Think about how we view our phones.
There are shields.
They are our digital shields on public transit. We stare at them to avoid eye contact with the physical world. By hijacking that screen, the killer shatters the protective bubble of the subway rules.
Ben is no longer isolated.
He is directly tethered to a murderer. The killer texts him, "Don't close your phone, Ben. Don't get off the train."
And then comes the really terrifying part. The killer sends another photo. This one is of a heavy-set man, red-faced, sitting in a subway car, looking like he's dozing off.
And Ben looks up from his screen.
And that exact man is sitting just a few yards away from him in the very same train car. The text reads, "He's getting off at Cortlandt. If he does, he dies."
This is where the psychological torture truly begins. The killer is stripping away Ben's agency while simultaneously forcing him into a position of absolute godlike responsibility.
He's given a ticking clock.
A ticking clock and a life to save, but he is completely paralyzed. And he's paralyzed not just by fear, but by the rigid social constraints of the subway we just talked about.
Right. I mean, imagine you were sitting on that train, the AC is rattling, the stranger across from you is dozing, suddenly your phone buzzes and tells you he's going to be murdered if he stands up. What do you actually do?
It's an impossible situation.
Do you walk up to a stranger in New York City and say, "Excuse me, a picture on my phone says you're going to be assassinated if you get off at the next stop"? You'd look completely insane.
People would record you on TikTok.
Exactly. So Ben rationalizes it. He tells himself it has to be an elaborate prank, a viral marketing stunt. The train pulls into Cortlandt Street, the pneumatic doors hiss open, and the heavyset man gets up to leave.
Ben watches him.
He almost says something. The word "hey" literally dies in his throat, and the man steps off the train. The doors close.
And then the reality of the threat is brutally confirmed. Over the noise of the train, Ben hears a distinct pop, like a heavy paper bag bursting or a car backfiring.
But as the train accelerates away, he sees the acoustic aftermath on the platform, a crowd gathering rapidly around a body.
And most chillingly, through the smeared glass of the moving train, he locks eyes with the woman who had exited just before the man.
Yeah, she is holding her phone, her mouth open in a silent scream, and her hand and coat sleeve are completely covered in bright arterial blood, like she dipped her arm in a pot of red ink.
It's a horrific cinematic visual.
Let me throw an analogy at you to try and capture what Ben is feeling. Being in Ben's situation right now feels like being trapped in a submarine. You're thousands of feet underwater. You can hear the metal hull groaning and cracking under the immense atmospheric pressure, but you can't see the water.
You just know the crush is coming.
And there is absolutely nowhere to run. But here is my question for you. Is Ben's paralysis in that moment just the normal bystander effect? The diffusion of responsibility? Or is there something deeper? Is his specific hidden trauma already holding him hostage before the physical trap even fully activates?
That is a phenomenal question, and it gets to the very core of survival psychology. While the bystander effect absolutely plays a part, that psychological phenomenon where individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim when other people are present, Ben's paralysis is far more insidious.
Because it's personal.
It is deeply rooted in his specific complex trauma. We learn later that his entire survival strategy for the past 15 years has been total invisibility.
He's addicted to anonymity.
Exactly. He has survived by being a ghost, by never drawing attention to himself, by never making a fuss or causing a scene. And the killer knows this.
The killer is weaponizing his own psychology against him.
The killer is weaponizing Ben's learned helplessness. To save the heavy-set man, Ben would have had to break his absolute core rule of survival, which is do not be noticed.
Wow.
The killer uses the enclosed, socially rigid environment of the train and the omniscient digital tether of the phone to force Ben into a crucible where his own coping mechanisms actively result in the deaths of others. It's a flawlessly designed psychological trap.
Okay, while Ben is trapped in this nightmare metal tube hurtling through the dark, Reid brilliantly shifts the narrative perspective. We pull back from the micro-terror inside the train to look at the macro response of the city outside.
The response to the chaos.
Right, the chaos of that execution at Cortlandt Street triggers a massive systemic reaction from the authorities. And this introduces us to two vastly different approaches to crisis management, embodied by two very different characters. We have to talk about NYPD Detective Kelly Hendricks.
Detective Hendricks is a fantastic, deeply flawed, incredibly human character. She is the epitome of boots on the ground, instinctual policing. She operates on gut feeling and kinetic energy.
But when we meet her, she is currently serving out a bureaucratic penance.
She's on what her partner Hernandez affectionately calls shit duty,
Officially, she's a neighborhood coordination liaison.
which is essentially a made-up, paper-pushing role meant to humiliate her and keep her off the street.
Why is she being humiliated? Because of a spectacularly satisfying, highly physical incident at one police plaza. She was at a formal medal presentation, and a police chief, a superior officer, came up behind her and put his hand on her waist inappropriately.
Now, the bureaucratic thing to do would be to file a complaint that would inevitably get buried by the union.
But Kelly doesn't do bureaucracy. Kelly operated on pure, hot-blooded, trained instinct. She grabbed his arm, stepped in, and executed a flawless, textbook judo hip throw.
Sending this police chief crashing through an entire catered table of complimentary sparkling wine glasses.
He broke 3 ribs and needed emergency surgery to remove a wine glass stem from a very uncomfortable place.
It's a tremendous establishing moment for her character, but it also tells us exactly how she processes threats.
She is impulsive.
She is impulsive, she is fiercely protective of her physical boundaries, and she runs hot. She acts first to neutralize the immediate threat, and she deals with the bureaucratic fallout later.
Act now, apologize later.
Exactly. This instinctual deontological drive, the belief that the immediate action itself matters more than the overarching systemic consequence, is exactly what puts her on the platform at the Franklin Street station, just as the situation escalates from a targeted assassination to a mass casualty event.
Exactly. Kelly is actually close by when things go to hell. She sees people on the street reacting to a subterranean tremor, and she knows in her gut something is fundamentally wrong.
She commandeers a cab, abandons it in gridlock traffic,
and sprints down into the Franklin Street subway station right after a secondary explosive device goes off on the platform. She dives straight into the choking smoke, the screams, and the blood, trying to physically pull people to safety.
Now contrast that visceral, bloody reality with Homeland Security agent Paul McDermott.
McDermott is the absolute antithesis of Kelly Hendricks. He is the cold, calculating voice of the federal bureaucracy. If Kelly is heat, friction, and instinct, McDermott is ice, algorithms, and protocol.
His mandate from the Department of Homeland Security is not to solve local crimes.
Right.
And it's certainly not to save individual lives on a micro scale. His singular overarching mission is to secure the city's infrastructure against a wider systemic threat.
When Kelly is covered in soot, coughing up lungfuls of concrete dust, looking at the pulverized remains of a victim on the platform, McDermott arrives looking completely pristine. His suit is sharp, his demeanor is flat.
The contrast is striking.
Kelly asks him what resources they are deploying to help the people still trapped on the train, which has now been emergency stopped deep in the tunnel. And McDermott basically looks at her and says, nothing.
He actively refuses to send a medical team in.
He tells Kelly his job is to contain the attack perimeter. To him, the passengers trapped on that train, including a severely injured transit worker, are mathematically acceptable collateral damage if it means keeping a potential suicide bomber isolated and preventing a secondary attack that could collapse the tunnel and kill thousands.
The clash between Kelly and McDermott represents the central ethical tension of modern disaster response. It is the trolley problem writ large, applied to urban terrorism.
The trolley problem is such a good way to frame it.
Kelly sees the individual suffering right in front of her, the blood on the concrete, and feels an absolute moral imperative to intervene, even at the risk of her own life or the lives of first responders. McDermott looks at a spreadsheet of acceptable losses.
He views the situation from 30,000 feet.
He is operating on strict utilitarianism. Maximize overall survival, minimize overall harm, even if it means letting a few people die agonizing deaths in the dark.
He even calculates the PR fallout, doesn't he?
Yes. He figures that if the passengers have to endure a horrific ordeal, they will eventually stumble out into the arms of a grateful public. The media will frame it as a story of resilience, and the PR fallout will take care of itself. It is a chillingly clinical, deeply cynical perspective.
So what does this all mean? Because as a reader, as someone listening to this, you are naturally wired to root for Kelly. We want to root for the person who cares, the person who dives into the fire to drag someone out.
Of course.
But let me push back on that for a second. Put yourself in the shoes of a federal director. In a city of 8 million people facing an unknown bomber who could have explosive devices planted all over the Manhattan transit grid, isn't McDermott actually mathematically right?
It's a tough pill to swallow.
But isn't his cold utilitarian math the only responsible way to govern a crisis of that magnitude? If he sends a 12-person medical extraction team into a hot zone and it triggers a blast that collapses the tunnel and kills them all, he has categorically failed his mandate.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of how institutions govern human life, you are hitting on the exact nerve Reid is exposing. Logically, administratively, McDiarmid's containment strategy is arguably the correct federal protocol. You secure the perimeter, you assess the threat vectors, you do not feed more potential victims into an unverified kill zone.
It's logical.
But Reid is forcing us to examine the psychological cost of that coldness. How much of your own humanity do you have to permanently strip away to make those calculations without flinching?
That's the real question.
What's deeply terrifying here is how McDiarmid's clinical, detached view of human life dangerously echoes the mindset of the serial killer pulling the strings. Both the killer and the Homeland Security agent view the individuals on that train not as human beings with families and fears, but as data points.
Pieces on a board.
Means to an end.
Yeah.
Kelly is the messy, flawed, bleeding heart that reminds us that these are people, not statistics.
It is deeply unsettling to realize that the bureaucratic state and the sociopathic killer are using the exact same logic board. And because McDiarmid refuses to send professional help, the burden of survival is violently shoved right back onto Ben Cross.
The system has failed.
Bureaucracy has turned its back, and now Ben, a man who is literally paralyzed by his own history of violence, who shakes at the sight of blood, is forced into a situation where he has to perform impromptu, highly invasive brain surgery. Here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, incredibly hard to read.
This is perhaps the most visceral, physiologically intense sequence in the entire narrative.
It's grueling.
At the Franklin Street station, just before the train was moved into the tunnel, a secondary bomb went off on the platform. It wasn't just concussive, it was a fragmentation device, packed with nails to maximize casualties.
And Sarah, the train conductor.
Yeah, a young woman named Sarah was looking out the small window of her cab to see what was happening. The blast wave drove a galvanized steel nail straight through the reinforced glass and deep into her skull, just above her eye.
She is dying on the floor of the driver's cab,
Bleeding out and going into severe convulsions.
Ben manages to force his way into the cab. He gets on the emergency radio and desperately begs Homeland Security for an EMT, a doctor, anyone. And Hoyt, McDiarmid's right-hand man, flatly tells him that the tunnel is a red zone. No one is coming.
Instead, they put a paramedic on the radio to talk Ben through what is happening inside Sarah's head. The EMT explains the horrific biological reality. Sarah's bleeding internally inside her cranial vault.
We have to talk about the biology here, specifically the Monroe-Kelly hypothesis, right?
Yes, the Monroe-Kelly hypothesis. The human skull is a rigid, closed box. It contains exactly three things: brain tissue, blood, and cerebrospinal fluid. If the volume of one of those things increases, say, from an arterial bleed caused by a nail, the pressure inside the skull skyrockets.
Because the bone can't expand.
Exactly. The bone cannot expand to accommodate the extra volume. The EMT tells Ben that this pooling blood is creating massive intracranial pressure. If that pressure isn't relieved immediately, it will physically crush her brainstem down into her spinal canal.
Which is called herniation.
Yes, herniation, and she will die in minutes.
So the EMT tells Ben over the crackling radio that he has to pull the nail out himself. Now, Reid's background as a scientist shines through here in the most grueling, mechanical way. He doesn't sugarcoat the physics of this extraction.
Not at all.
Ben tears open the train's meager first aid kit and finds absolutely nothing useful. No surgical tools, no hemostats, just some cheap bandages and a pair of flimsy, flat-bladed first aid scissors. He realizes, with mounting horror, that he has to use these cheap scissors like the claw of a hammer to pry a piece of metal out of a living woman's skull.
The mechanics of it are a sensory nightmare. The EMT warns him about the sterilization fallacy. There is no time to worry about infection when the brain is crushing itself. Ben has to straddle this convulsing, dying woman. He wedges the flat metal blades of the scissors under the bloody head of the nail.
And Reid forces the reader to feel the sensory feedback of this action.
Ben feels the slick heat of her blood on his hands. As he applies leverage and pulls, he feels the actual bone of her skull flexing under his fingers. Reid describes it as tightening like a bat's wing, threatening to cave in completely under the localized pressure of the scissor blades.
The nail scrapes and grinds against the jagged edges of the bone puncture. I literally read this scene through my fingers.
It's so intense.
Think of the board game operation where the buzzer goes off if your tweezers touch the side. But apply that to the horrific real-world stakes of causing permanent brain damage, severing an optic nerve, or causing instant death if your hand shakes even a millimeter.
And when the nail finally pops out, the release of pressure is explosive.
It's not just dark venous blood that follows the nail. It's a gush of clear cerebrospinal fluid and terrifyingly tiny gray fragments of brain matter.
The psychological toll of that visual is immense. Ben is literally vomiting in his mouth, staring at those tiny gray fragments, agonizing over what memories, what words, what pieces of Sarah's personality were contained in those microscopic pieces of tissue he just pulled out of her head.
But the brutal mechanics work. He relieves the intracranial pressure, the herniation stops, and Sarah actually regains a measure of consciousness.
He saves her.
I have to ask you, why does the author put Ben through this specific crucible? Is it just for the shock value, to prove he can write a gross medical scene, or is there a deeper psychological architecture at play here?
It's definitely not just for shock value.
Why force a man who is terrified of his own violent past, who is literally hiding from his identity as the son of a killer, to physically dig his hands into a woman's brain?
It is absolutely central to the psychological architecture of the novel. This is the turning point for Ben. His entire trauma is built around the horrifying, intimate violence inflicted by his father, who destroyed bodies, dismantled them, and took lives with his bare hands. Ben believes he's tainted by that. Deep in his core, he believes he is genetically tainted by that same violent blood. He believes his hands are only capable of destruction. Now, he is forced to inflict severe physical trauma, to plunge his hands into someone else's blood and manipulate their bone. But this time, the intent is to save a life, not end one.
He is weaponizing violence for a positive outcome.
Exactly. He is hijacking his father's skill set for empathy. It directly challenges his internalized belief that he is a monster. However, Reid brilliantly, cruelly undercuts this emotional victory immediately.
Right, the text message.
Just as Ben saves her, the adrenaline still pumping, his phone buzzes. The killer texts him again, taunting him, making it clear that they're watching. And Ben realizes with absolute dread that the killer chose these specific victims on this specific train to punish him.
The act of saving Sarah cracks Ben's emotional armor wide open, stripping away his anonymity and making him vulnerable to the massive revelation that follows.
And that revelation is an absolute gut punch.
Because the blood drying on Ben's hands, the sheer exhaustion of the adrenaline crash, the terror of the dark tunnel, it completely breaks down his defensive walls. When Detective Hendricks, who completely ignored McDiarmid's orders, finally manages to sneak onto the back of the train just as the killer remotely forces it to start moving deeper into the tunnel again, she confronts Ben.
She pins him down.
She points her weapon at him and she demands to know why this is happening. Why is a sniper executing people around him? And Ben just crumbles. The facade shatters.
Yeah.
He tells her the foundational secret of the entire story. Ben Cross is a fiction. He doesn't exist.
He looks at Kelly and says, "My name is Adam Crane." And for anyone in this fictional universe, hearing that name spoken out loud carries the concussive weight of a nuclear bomb.
Who is Adam Crane?
Adam Crane is the son of John Crane, universally known as the infamous Tuxedo Park Killer.
We get these terrifying flashbacks to 15 years earlier, pulling back the curtain on the monster that forged Ben. John Crane wasn't just your standard serial killer. He was a highly organized survivalist prepper. He believed the collapse of society was imminent.
And he used his wealth to build massive, heavily fortified underground bunkers beneath rural properties in upstate New York.
But the bunkers weren't stocked with canned beans to survive a nuclear winter. They were built for what he chillingly called the good work.
The good work. It's so disturbing.
He kidnapped young girls, 13, 14 years old. He locked them in subterranean cages, psychologically tortured them, dismembered them while they were still alive using a specialized surgical wire saw, and then burned their remains in an industrial furnace to cleanse them.
And the most horrifying aspect of John Crane's psychology, the thing that separates him from typical sociopathy, is that he didn't want to operate in a vacuum. He wanted an apprentice. He wanted a legacy that would outlive him.
He tried to groom his son.
He actively, methodically tried to groom his own 11-year-old son, Adam, to become a monster just like him. He utilized classic cult indoctrination techniques. He taught Adam how to hunt, how to gut and bleed out animals, how to navigate in pitch darkness.
He systematically normalized the butchery,
framing it as necessary survival skills for the coming apocalypse.
The psychological abuse is staggering, and we see the devastating aftermath of it in the therapy sessions Adam goes through after his father is finally caught by the FBI. Reid introduces us to Dr. Tamsin Hardy, a child psychologist tasked with an almost impossible job.
Breaking through Adam's protective amnesia.
Because Adam, this traumatized 11-year-old boy, has created a complete fantasy childhood to protect his psyche from the reality of what his father did. He's sitting in a sterile room, claiming his dad is a great guy, that they just went camping, that his dad is innocent.
Dr. Hardy is faced with a profound ethical dilemma, and she makes a deeply controversial choice. She realizes that the standard, gentle approach of talk therapy isn't going to work. Adam's delusions are too calcified.
Just to break them.
She knows that to save Adam from his delusions, she has to completely violently shatter them. She conducts an interrogation that borders on psychological torture. She slaps down high-resolution, gruesome crime scene photos of his father's victims right in front of the 11-year-old boy.
It's so harsh.
She forces him to look at the skeletal, charred remains of girls he knew, girls like Neve and Isabella, forcing him to say out loud where his father hid the pieces.
It's brutal to read. Now, let's use an analogy here.
Yeah.
I liken Dr. Hardy's approach to a controlled forest fire. Forest rangers will intentionally start fires to burn away dead, suffocating brush so that the healthy ecosystem can actually regrow. They know the fire itself is devastating in the short term, but without it, the whole forest rots.
That's a great comparison.
But looking at Dr. Hardy, I want to challenge you on this. Is Dr. Hardy crossing a line into outright abuse herself by forcing an 11-year-old to look at evidence photos of mutilated children? Or is extreme trauma the only cure for extreme delusion? Do you have to fight fire with fire when dealing with the aftermath of a psychopath?
You are hitting on a massive debate within the real-world psychiatric community regarding memory reconsolidation and exposure therapy. Reid doesn't offer a clean, simple answer because there isn't one. Dr. Hardy knows she's crossing a massive ethical line. The text shows she hates herself for doing it.
But she does it anyway.
She is operating under the deontological belief that if Adam doesn't confront the absolute, unfiltered truth of his father's monstrosity, the internalized narrative, the grooming will fester and eventually turn Adam into the very thing his father wanted. She is intentionally breaking the bone again so it can set properly.
It's agonizing.
It's arguably cruel, but she believes it's the only path to genuine recovery and preventing future violence.
And what her extreme methods uncover is the ultimate betrayal that finally broke Adam's mind. The flashback takes us down into the bunker, down in the dark, damp earth. John Crane brings his 11-year-old son down to the cage where he is holding his final victim. He unlocks the cage, hands Adam a heavy hunting knife, and tells him it's time for his rite of passage.
He tells him to do the good work.
It is the ultimate horrifying test of nature versus nurture. Will Adam succumb to years of methodical conditioning, or will his inherent biological empathy win out? And Adam makes the bravest, most heartbreaking choice possible for a child. When his father realizes Adam won't do it, John raises a rifle to shoot the terrified girl himself. And Adam steps in front of the gun to protect her.
And his father pulls the trigger anyway.
John Crane shoots his own 11-year-old son squarely in the back. And as if the gunshot isn't enough, as Adam is lying on the concrete floor bleeding out, his father stands over him and pours burning chemical wound seal powder directly into the open bullet hole.
It's pure sadism.
Now, wound seal is a real product. It's a hydrophilic polymer mixed with potassium ferrate. When it hits blood, it creates a massive exothermic reaction. It literally burns the flesh to cauterize the wound and stop the bleeding. The physical agony of having chemicals burn inside an open gunshot wound is matched only by the psychological devastation of realizing your father views you as entirely disposable the moment you fail to reflect his own monstrous image.
This specific, multi-layered trauma leaves a permanent psychological blueprint on Adam's developing brain. For the next 15 years, even living successfully under the alias Ben Cross, he carries the internalized voice of his father in his head.
It's a symptom of complex PTSD.
Exactly. Every time Ben feels fear, every time he doubts himself, the voice in his head mocks him. It calls him weak, it tells him he should have been a killer, it tells him empathy is a fatal flaw. Ben has survived physically, he escaped the bunker, but psychologically he is still trapped down there in the dark with his father.
Which brings us to the monumental twist that turns the entire narrative and the concept of victimhood completely on its head. Down in the subway tunnel, Ben finally puts the pieces together. He figures out who is texting him, who is orchestrating this incredibly complex massacre on the train, who slashed the throat of the man at Cortlandt Street, and who planted the fragmentation bomb.
It's not a copycat killer looking for fame.
It's not a radicalized disciple of his father's survivalist manifesto.
It is Emily Walker.
The final victim.
The girl in the cage. The very girl Adam stepped in front of a bullet to save. The girl Ben thought he had accidentally killed when, bleeding out on the floor, he was forced to initiate the bunker's purge sequence, flooding the subterranean room with propane gas and sparking a massive fire.
Knowing that Emily is the killer completely shifts the paradigm of everything we've read up to this point. We finally learn the mechanics of how she survived that inferno. While the bunker filled with expanding propane gas while she was suffering from horrific third-degree burns, this teenage girl dragged herself into the massive industrial furnace.
It's unimaginable.
She pushed her raw, burned elbows and knees against the soot-covered, abrasive base of the chimney, and she physically inched her way up, breath by agonizing breath, 50 feet to the surface. It is a staggering feat of biomechanical survival, driven purely by adrenaline overriding her pain receptors.
But the profound tragedy of Emily Walker is that her miraculous physical escape was only the beginning of her true destruction. When she finally breached the surface, coughing up ash, horribly burned and traumatized beyond belief, she was found wandering the woods by a Forest Service worker.
And he didn't help her?
No. He took her to an isolated cabin, ostensibly to call the authorities and help her. But instead, seeing her vulnerability, he kept her isolated. He let her physically heal just enough to survive, and then he systematically sexually assaulted her.
It's the second ultimate betrayal by the adult world. She survives a mastermind serial killer only to be immediately victimized by her supposed rescuer. And so, the dam breaks. She kills him. She uses the very hunting knife she had taken from Adam in the bunker to end the forest worker's life.
And in that moment, in that blood-soaked cabin, whatever inherent humanity or childhood innocence was left in Emily Walker simply evaporates.
If we look at the thematic core of the book, this is where the cycle of violence truly, permanently takes hold. Emily spends the next 15 years living entirely off the grid as a ghost, letting the world and the FBI think she died in the bunker fire.
And she uses those 15 years to meticulously, patiently track down everyone tangentially involved in John Crane's trial.
She blames them all. She blames the paralegal, the court clerks, the guards, for keeping the truth hidden, for protecting Adam's new identity, for letting her parents die without ever knowing what happened to her. She becomes the ultimate apex predator.
She hunts them.
And the most chilling detail, she uses a surgical wire saw, the exact, highly specific weapon John Crane used to dismember his victims, to nearly decapitate her own father, whom she blames for giving up the search for her, and the paralegal, Roy Lopez.
It's so dark.
I see Emily as a twisted, hyper-realistic version of a classic horror movie, Final Girl. You know the trope. The one innocent girl who survives the slasher by becoming tough, resourceful, and eventually killing the bad guy. But Emily was so profoundly broken by her survival, so continuously victimized, that she crossed the line and became the monster herself.
She became the thing she ran from.
So my question to you is, if Emily is out here using wire saws, hunting people down, torturing them and burning them alive, didn't John Crane essentially win? He wanted to create a legacy of violence. He wanted an apprentice. He failed to break his son. But didn't he successfully, if inadvertently, mold Emily into his ultimate successor?
That is a deeply unsettling but highly accurate psychological reading of the text. And Emily tells Ben exactly that when they finally communicate. She says that John Crane would be incredibly proud of the woman she's become. John Crane stripped away her humanity in that cage, and the forest worker extinguished whatever flicker of hope remained. She now operates with a cold, calculated need for absolute control and biblical retribution. She is punishing Ben because he lied on the witness stand to protect his own new identity, but more profoundly, she is punishing him because he is the proxy for his father.
He's the stand-in.
She can't get to John Crane in his concrete supermax cell, so she will destroy his son in the exact, methodical way John destroyed her friends. She has internalized the trauma and is now executing John Crane's programming flawlessly.
And that brings us to the fiery apocalyptic climax of the novel. Emily has hacked the transit system and forced the subway train to halt at the 181st Street Ghost Station.
The Ghost Station.
For those who don't know, there are abandoned stations deep under New York cavernous, forgotten spaces of wet brick, gravel, and darkness. It is a perfect, terrifying echo of the subterranean bunker where John Crane tortured her. She wants to kill Ben in the dark, deep underground, completing the cycle perfectly.
This is where 15 years of built-up trauma, crushing survivors' guilt, and cold vengeance finally converge in a single physical space. Ben has a choice here, and it's a crucial one. He could stay locked on the train, hide behind Kelly Hendricks' badge and gun, and let the authorities deal with the monster hunting him.
But he doesn't.
No, Ben makes a conscious, deliberate decision to pry open the doors, walk off the train, and step into the pitch-black tunnels to face her alone.
Why? I mean, structurally, why does he do that? He knows she has a wire saw. He knows she's a highly trained, remorseless killer now. He has no weapons.
Because Ben carries the overwhelming, suffocating guilt of believing he killed her 15 years ago. Even when he realizes she survived the fire, he knows his silence at the trial, his need for anonymity, allowed her to be forgotten by the world. He feels entirely responsible for the monster she has become.
He's offering himself up.
He walks into the dark, not to fight her, not to win, but to accept his punishment. He wants to offer her a physical target for her rage, a way out of the darkness, even if it costs him his life. It's an act of profound, if borderline suicidal, empathy.
It's an incredible cinematic confrontation. They are in this pitch-black, cavernous ghost station. The air is freezing. Emily is whipping the surgical wire saw through the air, trying to decapitate him in the dark. She maneuvers him into a trap. Ben slips and falls into a massive pool of liquid on the platform. He realizes instantly by the smell that it's alcohol. Ethanol.
And Emily strikes a road flare.
The entire platform erupts in a massive sheet of blue chemical flame.
It is a literal and metaphorical baptism by fire. She manages to get the wire saw around his neck, and they are both standing in the flames, burning. Ben is fighting back, but he's not fighting to kill her. He's just trying to survive the strangulation. The intense heat of the ethanol fire is actually cauterizing the wounds as the wire saw makes them, mirroring the wound seal powder his father used. It is a descent into absolute sensory hell.
And just as she is about to pull the wire clean through his trachea, Detective Kelly Hendricks charges out of the tunnel. Her own uniform pants are literally on fire from sprinting through the flames. She doesn't hesitate. She doesn't try to negotiate.
She relies purely on her academy training.
And her deontological instinct to stop the immediate threat. Ignoring the absolute chaos around her, she takes 4 seconds. She lines up her sights and puts 3 clean rounds straight into Emily Walker's chest, killing her instantly and ending the 15-year nightmare.
It is a brutal, violent, but necessary intervention. But think about the symbolic resonance of how this resolves. Ben voluntarily walked into the dark, surrendering to the violence of his past, fully prepared to be consumed and killed by it. He survives the flames a second time, but this time he is pulled from the wreckage not by his murderous, abusive father, but by an officer of the law who fundamentally believes he is a victim, not a monster.
That's a huge distinction.
Kelly's intervention represents the flawed, messy, but inherently good system of justice and protection that Ben has been hiding from his entire life.
So I have to ask, does Ben walking into that tunnel, offering his life to Emily, prove he's finally beaten his father's programming because he chose empathy over murder? Or was it just a suicidal manifestation of his deep-seated survivor's guilt?
I strongly argue it's the former. It is a victory, however Pyrrhic. John Crane taught him to preserve his own life at the expense of others, to view other human beings as meat, as disposable. Ben offered his own life to acknowledge another person's pain. It is the ultimate rejection of his father's sociopathic philosophy, even if it almost got him decapitated.
And Kelly saving him.
Kelly saving him at the last second doesn't negate his choice. It validates his humanity. It proves to him, finally, that he is worth saving.
What an incredibly dense, rewarding narrative. From a mundane, highly relatable, bad day at the office, getting fired and stressing over rent, to performing makeshift brain surgery on a moving train, to a fiery, apocalyptic showdown with a ghost in an abandoned subway station, Andrew Reid masterfully blends the high-octane ticking clock mechanics of a thriller with this deeply unsettling, scientifically grounded exploration of childhood trauma and the long, dark shadow of serial violence.
He shows us that trauma isn't just a memory you can repress. It's a physical architecture that shapes every single decision we make, from whether we can walk down a flight of stairs to how we react to violence. The novel constantly asks us to consider whether we are doomed to repeat the violence done to us, like Emily Walker tragically did, or if we can break the cycle through empathy, like Ben ultimately tries to do.
And that brings us right back to where we started, that murky diagnostic landscape. The X-ray machine doesn't work on trauma. You can't just point to the broken bone and put a plaster cast on it. Ben Cross survived the fire, again. But his anonymity, that psychological cast he built around himself for 15 years, is completely irrevocably gone. The entire world, the media, the FBI now knows that Adam Crane, the son of the Tuxedo Park killer, is alive and was at the very center of this massive, bloody New York subway massacre.
Which leaves us with a profound, terrifying dilemma going forward.
Exactly. So I want to leave you, our listener, with this lingering question to mull over as you go about your day. Imagine you are Ben. If your entire survival strategy, your absolute psychological safety net for 15 long years, was built on hiding your identity and remaining completely invisible, what happens when the smoke finally clears and suddenly the whole world is pointing their cameras right at you? How do you survive surviving? We'll leave you to think on that.